spotted KPA patrols down on the beach. Use your binocs to tag them before you run in blind.
I see a large transmitting array.
Almost 10 years ago, Crysis was unleashed on the world to an audience who couldn't actually run the game. During that time, it was considered a positive that the game was so good looking and demanding. If you were to do that today, your game's brand would likely be dragged through the mud backwards, being labelled as unoptimised by a sea of armchair programmers. Times have changed, and a good indicator of progress is to look back in time to see how far things have come along. 2007 was a big year for games. We had titles such as Halo 3 and Call of Duty 4, which would go on to be considered the golden child of their respective franchises. Crysis 1 released during the same year would be no exception. For those unfamiliar, Crysis is a first-person shooter set on a tropical jungle island, in which you have access to the nanosuit, granting you the ability to use incredible speed, predator-like invisibility, superhuman strength, and an armor mode which renders you harder than a diamond. All of these abilities use energy when consumed, which recharges passively when suit modes aren't actively engaged. Crysis 1 features huge open levels providing you with freedom of approach, along with a list of vehicles and guns to inspire your imagination. My first experience with the franchise was Crysis 2 on the Xbox 360, and whilst it became one of my favourite games, I couldn't help but hear the criticism from PC gamers about how it was a regression from the first game. So I was eager to try out Crysis 1 to see what all the fuss was about. In this video I'm using the Origin version of the game, and it required nothing in the way of tweaking to get it running on the latest version of Windows 10, which was kinda nice as some games from this era can be a bit of a pain. The system I'm using features an i7-6700K at 4.5 GHz and a Radeon R9 280X at 1100 MHz. Thinking about this would be sufficient for a 10-year-old game. But even with this setup, Crysis kicked my rig's butt and refused to surrender very high settings to a stable 60 frames per second 100% of the time. But I wasn't even mad, because, well, I mean, just look at it. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. To this day, Crysis is still very impressive to look at. I never get bored of witnessing the opening island scene at the start of the first mission. It truly is one of gaming's great moments. Right off the bat, you'll want to customize your controls, and here is where the main problems occur. For me, holding down a key, then using a mouse-controlled weapon wheel in the heat of combat is pretty much suicide, so rebinding each suit mode to separate keys is a must. But you can't do that in the main menu, which to me seemed like a simple feature. Hold to ADS isn't here either, and even in 2007, these were basic things to have, so I ended up spending an hour researching these issues and adding lines of code into the controls XML file to get them to work, which sucks that I had to do it this way, but there we go. In terms of difficulty, I'd recommend choosing the highest setting. Because the suit offers so much power, I feel that playing on anything below the highest difficulty feels a bit too easy. Fortunately though, the Delta difficulty does nail the balance of challenge for the most part. Playing on this setting basically makes it so that if you just stroll into a compound or even a medium-sized patrol without a plan, you'll get your arse handed to you. The suit itself is the star of the show with 4 main abilities to switch to on the fly. Speed mode accelerates your passive movement and gives you almost teleportation like sprint speeds. Armor allows you to sponge a few extra hits. Strength lets you jump higher and punch harder, and Cloak makes you invisible. In each mode there are little details laid underneath the main abilities, such as in speed mode, switching weapons and firing modes is faster. Armor mode allows faster energy and health recharge. Cloak mode lets you move slightly faster than your default speed. And strength mode stabilizes your aim and significantly reduces recoil. You can also toggle between these modes whilst driving vehicles, for example. Entering cloak mode whilst driving a boat gives you a few extra moments before being detected. When I first got into the game, I felt as if the movement was a bit off, where if you wanted to simply move around and you weren't in speed mode, you felt like you were carrying a piano around. Movement also didn't feel as smooth as, say, anything from the Quake engine, for example. But after a while I actually grew to appreciate the movement and controls not being immediately easy to pick up. Somewhat similar to games from the olden days, mastering the controls was part of the progression, and by the end of the game I generally felt like I improved as a player. The AI are challenging at first, but once you learn their behaviour patterns you will easily be able to run rings around them regardless of their numbers. I did find them quite easy to exploit though, by simply uncloaking, headshotting somebody and then recloaking again, basically making you undetectable even when you do it right in front of one of them. The Koreans can call for reinforcements by firing off a flare should you be detected, though the trigger for this event seems quite sensitive, as even when you aren't ever spotted, if an AI sees anything remotely out of place they'll call it in. But overall the Koreans are a formidable and fun enemy to fight. A problem I often notice in other games that feature spotting is that the devs really want recon to be an integral part of their game. So what they do is they make tagging ridiculously overpowered by making the people you spot become 3D wall hacked, essentially making the decision for the player whether they should tag people or not, rendering it busy work. For me it's like, if you're gonna let me see people through walls making the game easy as pie, at least give me a gadget that I can throw to do all the work for me, or have it so that enemies are automatically wall hacked when I turn up to a new area. Don't make me sit on a hill for a while tagging each individual target. In Crysis though, it does allow you to tag enemies so that they appear on your minimap, but I never felt like I had to rely on it to make the game playable. Instead it was something that I chose to do as part of my plan, not a crucial element to the game design where, if I don't do it, the other gameplay systems simply fall apart because they rely on it so heavily. Vehicles are present in the game, and for the most part they mainly serve as transport due to them being pretty fragile. However, you can use this to your advantage with the lightly armoured vehicles, as driving at full speed and then bailing at the last second causes pickups and jeeps to explode on impact, providing a cool improvised weapon. About halfway through the game, you're introduced to the second enemy type, being the alien faction. They aren't as bad as the internet makes them out, but they essentially are flying robots who take a few extra rounds to put down, without any of the squad-focused behaviour of the Korean soldiers. The aliens have two forms, one being a heavy, which circles you in the air, shooting at a distance. The second form being a lot smaller, fly around at ground level, and mixes between close-range melee and long-range attacks.
Welcome to Earth.
The alien encounters are still enjoyable thanks to solid gunplay which uses a mixture of accumulative recoil and spread-based systems, so essentially the longer you fire an assault rifle, the more intense the recoil and random deviation will be. Gun sounds are punchy, with my favourite probably being the Scar in full auto. You can also just not use weapons at all and go beat everything into a pulp if you so wish, and I'm pretty sure you can complete the whole game without ever firing a single shot if you so desired. The levels are a mix of the best of both linear and open worlds, featuring huge play spaces with an objective marked on your map, free for you to approach however you see fit. The level designs themselves are a mixed bag, ranging from amazing craftsmanship to a linear valley with some buildings and bushes dropped in. The soundtrack is a nice blend of orchestral and jungle themed instruments and fits the theme quite nicely. The music score is pretty good, though an issue I found was that during gameplay it never really reels down a notch from being loud and bombastic, even when playing stealthily for example, so eventually I ended up turning off the music completely altogether, but for the moments where the music fits with what's happening on screen, especially during the cinematics, it does a really great job of enhancing the emotional impact of the scenes. I'm not a big story guy, but what they have here is really quite intriguing and never gets in the way of the shooting. It's told through a series of few but well enacted cutscenes from a first person perspective, which is nice, and does a good job leading you through the game into its cliffhanger ending. The real story though is what you end up doing during the missions. It's a game where you remember it for the moments where everything in the sandbox just clicks really organically, and that satisfaction of a plan coming together, or in some cases the plan falling apart and turning out better than you originally thought. If I had to give Crysis a score, I'd give it a solid 7.472 carried a 6 out of 10. It manages to pull off what it set out to do, but not really much else. I'd like to see more from a franchise in this style, as this formula still has a lot of potential to be expanded upon.